Welcome to the Brown University Library and Assessing the Validity of Scientific Literature. In this module, we will explore the question of scholarly journals and how a student doing research might evaluate them for unethical and predatory practices. This module was designed and recorded by Andrew Creamer and Erica Sevitson. Our objectives are to define terms such as open access journals, public access journals, impact factors, indexing, and phrases used by journals such as included in PubMed Central and indexed in Medline. To recognize and describe some warning signs of suspicious journals exhibiting unethical business practices. To use Brown University Library resources and tools to find and evaluate scholarly journals in your field. To describe an approach to locating journals for your future publications. You will sometimes hear about the term predatory publishing being used in a discussion of open access. These are two separate issues and should not be conflated. For some background, here is a definition of open access. Open access is used broadly to describe a movement to make scientific research output freely available to anyone, regardless of whether they subscribe to a journal or have access via an institution. Although open access has been talked about for decades, as a movement it gained momentum in the early 2000s to counter the cost of online journals. Public access is sometimes confused with OA, but is not exactly the same thing. Broadly speaking, it refers to a governmental mandate which requires that the products of publicly funded research, such as NIH-funded research, be made publicly available online in a timely manner. Being open access or public access in and of its own is no reflection on the quality of the research presented. You may also have heard the terms predatory journals or predatory publishing. These were terms coined to describe some unethical practices used in the wake of the open access movement. The terms are controversial, but generally refer to journals that market themselves as open access, but in reality exist mainly to make a profit. It's important to note that open access does not necessarily mean predatory. Being open access does not on its own affect the quality of content or diminish its peer review. The term predatory can be pejorative. We prefer to describe unethical or suspicious publishing practices. With a few notable exceptions, rather than presenting a specific list of journals as predatory, it's preferable to develop some critical skills that you can use to evaluate an individual title or publisher and its rigor or trustworthiness. So what are the hallmarks of an unethical journal? It may publish submissions with rapid turnaround time, sometimes within a few days or weeks. The peer review process is not clear or is advertised, or the editorial process is not obvious. The journal may use deceitful tactics such as untrue claims, false impact factors, or presenting editors or editorial boards using researchers' names and bios without their knowledge. It may set up fake accounts of authentic journals to deceive potential authors. This is sometimes known as hijacking. They may charge extremely high or extremely low APCs, which are article processing charges. Please note that charging a fee is not inherently predatory. It is common for open access and non-open access journals to require authors to pay APCs. Before we go further, here are a few definitions of terms that are often used when evaluating journals. The journal impact factor is a measure of the frequency with which the average article in a journal has been cited in a particular year or period. A journal's impact factor is often used to determine the top journals in the field. Some recognized and reputable sources of impact factors are the database Journal Citation Reports, which Brown subscribes to, and Scopus, which Brown does not subscribe to. If you see Google Scholar cited as an impact factor source, that should be used with one of the above databases. Copernicus value is another source that is sometimes cited. The Copernicus value is not a reputable source for an impact factor and should not be accepted on its own. Please remember that journals in different fields may have very different impact factors. The top journal in oncology, cancer research, may have a very different impact factor than the top journal in a subspecialty like child psychiatry. Indexing refers to whether an article database assigns subject headings or keywords to articles that it covers. These headings are from a list of terms called a thesaurus or a controlled vocabulary. For instance, Medline database uses MESH or medical subject headings. An article database may or may not use indexing. Before a database makes the decision to index a journal, the journal is reviewed by a committee to determine factors and standards such as quality of research, policies regarding peer review, and the longevity and likelihood of continued publication. Indexing in a major database can be used as a proxy for determining the reputation and quality of the journal, although it is not the only factor to consider. In the case of PubMed, PubMed is actually an interface to the Medline database. That is, it includes all of the content you would find on Medline via Ovid or Web of Science, but it also contains some other materials. For instance, all of PubMed Central's content will show up within PubMed, but Medline does not index all the content in PubMed Central. You will sometimes see journals claim to be indexed in PubMed. Sometimes this is a result of confusion, and sometimes it's deliberately misleading. It's good to remember that there is no such thing as being indexed in PubMed. Google Scholar is another article database. It has very wide coverage and it does search the full text of journal articles, but it does not apply subject headings or inclusion or exclusion criteria, so it is not an index database. It is accurate to say that a journal is included or covered in PubMed or Google Scholar. It is not accurate for a journal to claim that their journals are indexed in these sources. So how do you, as a consumer of medical research, evaluate whether a journal that you've found is generally reputable or is unethical? You may see some ungrammatical sentences and misspellings in the text, which could imply hasty publication practices. The journal may use a title that varies from a legitimate journal by a single letter or word. There may be misleading statements regarding the journal being indexed in PubMed or its availability in PubMed, or it may advertise a Copernicus value as impact factor. The journal website may use hyperbolic sales language, or they might use that language to recruit authors and editors via email. There might be a very short period between submission, acceptance, and publication. It may lack information about its reviewers and peer review process, or the information about the editors and editorial board. And they might use the same journal abbreviation as a similar journal which is indexed in Medline. Here is an example of two journals that we're going to look at a little more closely. On the right, we have the Journal of Biomedical Science. At a quick glance, I see that this journal is published by Springer Nature, which is a publisher that I recognize and trust. On the left is the Journal of Biomedical Sciences, one letter away from the other title. I cannot see who publishes this journal, but I do see that they include a Copernicus value. And they do indicate an impact factor, but they don't indicate where that impact factor is from. This tells me that I should critically evaluate this journal. If you're looking for some trustworthy journals, here are some journals with established peer review processes. You will find articles from all of these journals within PubMed Central when the work is the result of NIH funding. JAMA actually publishes an open access journal called JAMA Open. Here are some open access publishers that have established peer review processes and are considered trustworthy. It's important to remember that articles have been retracted from some of the top biomedical journals for various reasons. So, regardless of the publisher and whether it's open access or not, you should always retain a critical perspective when evaluating the methodology in any research article. So let's do some quick evaluation as we would in a PubMed search. I want to do a search for Alzheimer's with amyloid and anticoagulants and plasma. So I run my search. I retrieve 15 articles. As I page down, I see that several of these articles are free or in PMC. We're going to focus on 2 of these articles. The first article that I want to look at is number 7 in my list, from J. Biochem. As I mouse over, I see that this is the Journal of Biological Chemistry. Let's take a look at the abstract. Glancing at the abstract and paging down a little bit, I see that this article has been indexed for Medline, so those mesh terms, those medical subject headings, have been assigned. I also see that it's free in PMC. This likely means that the research was NIH funded, so they needed to make it publicly available. If I need to know more about this journal, I could find out by going to the journal title, clicking on it, and going to the NLM catalog to look it up. The NLM catalog is a list of journals held by National Library of Medicine with information about where the journal is indexed and what the coverage is within that database. This journal has been published since 1905. It's published by a well-known scientific association, the American Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. Paging down a little further, I see that it's included in Index Medicus and in Medline since 1965. I also see that it's currently indexed for Medline. This means that NLM judges that there's still a valid peer review practice in place, and they trust that the publication has high quality standards and will not be canceled anytime soon. Going back to our PubMed search, let's go to number 6 in our list by Westmark. Looking at this abstract, I do not see that it's been indexed in Medline, and I don't see any subject headings associated with it. If I don't recognize the title, I can go to the NLM catalog to see what I can find out. Here we see a much shorter catalog record than with the previous journal. I see that the journal has only been published since 2011. This is not necessarily a sign of quality. Major publishers start new journals all the time. The publisher is the Omics Publication Group. For indexing, it says it's not currently indexed for Medline, and citations are for the articles where the manuscript was deposited in PubMed Central in compliance with public access policies, such as NIH. PubMed selected citations only, so that's probably just those PMC articles. This is not a lot of information, but it does raise some red flags. If I wanted to learn more, I could go to the journal's homepage and look for indexing information, as we saw for the Journal of Biomedical Sciences example earlier. But I think for now I've seen enough that, again, I might use a very critical eye when evaluating content from this publisher. In an earlier slide, we discussed that it's best not to present an entire list of journals as unethical or predatory. However, here is an example of a publisher, Omics International, which is under investigation for their business tactics. Omics journals utilize many of the unethical practices we detail above and recently received a $50 million fine from the FTC for their practices. Returning to the NLM catalog record for the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease and Parkinsonism, remember, this is a journal that is part of the Omics group. Here is a statement that details some of the practices that caused the publisher to be investigated, and you can see that they used some tactics that had been flagged as suspicious. They calculated their own impact scores and did not clearly disclose that fact to consumers. They tell researchers that their journals are indexed by federal research databases, but that is not in fact true. A couple of closing notes. If you run across an article in a resource like Google Scholar and cannot find it through PubMed, you can check the indexing in a resource called Ulrich. Ulrich shows you where a journal is indexed and whether it is peer-reviewed. Ulrich is available through the Brown University Library. We will not go into Ulrich in this session, but feel free to reach out to any Brown librarian if you find yourself needing to use it. If you would like to publish an article and are trying to evaluate a journal from the perspective of an author, an excellent resource for you is Think, Check, Submit. This gives you some things to look at if you're trying to decide whether to submit to a journal. We also recommend talking to your research mentor if you're just getting started. So in summary, here are some tips to use when evaluating a journal in your research. Check to see whether the journal is indexed by Medline. If an impact factor is listed, check for Scopus or journal citation reports. Look for evidence of peer review. Check to see if it's associated with a scientific association or society. See if there are recognized editors and authors with expertise in the topic area of the journal, and see if there are detailed biographies of those editors. And with journal articles, critically evaluate the research question, the methodological rigor, the quantity and quality of evidence that they cite, whether the authors are transparent in their funding and list any conflicts of interest, and check for replicability and reproducibility of the research. And finally, if you have any other questions about this process, please feel free to reach out to any member of the Sciences team. Thank you.